show you how goopy the finish is right now. The point is, right now, it doesn't matter that the finish goes on smooth. These are the buildup coats. These are all the coats that I put on, really heavy and thick, just to fill the pores of the wood. You could see just how uneven the surface is everywhere. Now it's not completely dry yet, so I can't go into the next phase where I'm going to take a sanding block and block this off. This has to be dry. If it's still kind of goopy like this, you're going to drag the oil rather than sand it, and we really want to sand it.
So right now we're at the point where I've done 6 or 7 coats on this buildup coats, and now I'm going to go ahead and put it into the drying phase, and it's just going to dry until I'm ready to go ahead and block this off, and then you'll see the rest of that. And then we're going to move on to talking about sheaths, and then making a sheath, and then we're going to also have a video on how to sharpen your new knife and do some cut tests. But since I have you, and we're talking handle finishes, I thought I'd go ahead and talk about a couple other finishes, because your project knife, you may have decided to go with something else that might require a slightly different finishing technique. So hardwoods are obviously the easiest to finish, and I've fallen in love with using hardwoods. You know, there's a fond place in my heart for these spalted woods that are stabilized, but I'll tell you what, since I've gotten used to using these hardwoods, they machine like metal, and I love working with metals, so that's great. They have a very high drop tolerance, so if you drop your knife, they don't chip or break, usually. And they finish out just amazingly easily. So on these guys right here, my finishing methods are incredibly simple. I like to sand these through my grits all the way up to 500 grit. I don't go any higher. And you could take these to a buffer with a clean, like a tight buffing wheel that's clean without rouge on it, and you can buff the finish. I don't ever do that because I find it kind of muddies the grain and it darkens it, even if you don't have buffing compound on there. So that's not my favorite. What I've actually gone to doing is using this aluminum mag and wheel polish from Mother's. This stuff works great. I tried it one day by trial and error. I've never seen anybody else do this. I've never seen anybody on YouTube doing this, but I'll tell you what, when I did it my first time, I thought, you know, that it might ruin my piece, so I tried it on a scrap piece, and it worked great. I've done this on a lot of knives now, and it works wonderfully. I can't believe nobody else is trying this yet. Give it a whirl. Don't knock it till you try it. These woods are so dense that, believe it or not, this stuff has pretty good cut in it. And if you sand this to 500 grit and then you buff this on and buff it off just like you would polish an aluminum mag rim or something, this stuff comes out gorgeous, almost glass smooth, great shine. Give it a try. I also brought out this super glue here. I'm going to show you a handle that I did with super glue. This one came out really well. Check this out. This handle, this is a super glue finish. What I did is on this handle, I applied 15 thick coats of super glue using a rubber glove on my finger, and I just put several drops on there and just smeared them around. I did that 15 different times and did a buildup, and then I blocked it with a block wet sanding until it was smooth and polished it with that Mother's, and it came out just gorgeous. That's if you want a shiny, extremely hard finish. This super glue finish is something that I got from the pen turning world. This takes a little bit of patience. If you buy the super glue accelerant, this actually goes really fast. You could probably do 5 coats in one night with the accelerant in between each coat, and then do 5 coats another night, block it off, sand it, and have this done in 2 nights. Whereas the oil finish, it can easily take 3 days to do an oil finish. Anyhow, so oil finishes definitely consume some time. Generally, I have lots of projects working at the same time, so it doesn't bother me to, you know, spend 3 or 4 days finishing a handle on a knife. Now, I know a lot of people that make knives for a living. There's no way you would spend that kind of time on finishing a handle. But like I said, I'm a hobby guy. If I'm going to use this really gorgeous wood, I want to see all of the wood pop out. So I do use some higher end techniques to get that grain to pop. The super glue is a really neat trick. You might try that. And then you got your engineered stuff, these guys right here, and these are pretty similar to hardwood. You just sand them all the way out to the highest grit that you feel like, and then you can take them to the buffer, or you can use this also. This works pretty good. Although I will say this right here on lighter materials, it's probably not a good idea. It kind of muddies them up. On these lighter materials, if you just wet sand them up to like 1,000 grit and then wax them or take them to a clean Cecil buff, that probably is the best for these real light materials. And then we move into finishing certain woods like hardwood maples and walnut. I learned this from the gun world, actually. That's where my heat gun comes in here. When I have a piece of walnut or a piece of maple, what I like to do is called raising the grain. So I get the handle finished pretty much to dimensional size, and then I take a wet rag and I get the handle wet, and then I heat it quickly with the heat gun, and it makes the grain stand up. The wood grain will actually stand up. See, on those woods, when you go to sand, what happens is you're pushing the grain of the wood down into the pores, and you don't see it happening. But when you get it wet, and then you heat it with a heat gun, it raises the grain. You can actually watch the grain of the wood stand up, and you'll see all these little tips on top of the wood. And then you take a really sharp sandpaper and a block, and you cut that raised grain off. I like to raise the grain 3 times, and then I move on to an oil finish, and it just comes out amazing. I've done several gun stocks this way, and I've done lots of knives this way, especially knives that I want to do some gold wire inlay, different things like that. I like to raise the grain 3 times, get it knocked back with the heat gun and fresh sharp sandpaper, and then I move into my finishing processes. Now for my pro tips, okay, on all my knives I finish with paste wax, pretty much everything. So what I like to do is I take this paste wax and I apply it with a rag, and then I get it to run with the heat gun. For some reason, when you heat paste wax with the heat gun and it turns liquid and it flows and it fills all the voids, when it dries, it's incredibly tough and resilient. Way tougher than if you just wipe it on and let it dry. For some reason, when you heat it with the heat gun and let it flow and then come back, you can barely even rub it off. I mean, you can buff sitting on your couch with a rag for a half an hour and still can't get all that wax off, which is exactly what you want. It's exactly what you want. You want to build a good end coat that's resilient and it's going to resist water and pretty much make your knife indestructible to the elements. That is a great tip. I had a couple guys in semi-disbelief about what I was talking about with this paste wax, so they came over with some knives that they had done, and we did this trick, and they were completely in shock and awe over this trick of just simple as just heating the wax to get it to flow and then buffing it off. And then you can use this Renaissance wax. I actually like this microcrystalline Renaissance wax more for wiping down my blades with to prevent rust. This is a curator's wax that they use in museums to protect different things from tarnishing. It works really well on brass, nickel, silver, different metals like that you buff out to a nice luster, and then you cover it up with this wax here and it won't tarnish. So this stuff is amazing. It's very expensive. I think this was $30 right here, but I've had this for 4 years and I've only used maybe a quarter of it. So it takes very little, but it is definitely worth your investment, and it smells wonderful if you ask me. So give that a try. Okay, so we're gonna jump back into the knife. I'm gonna go ahead and block this off, and then we're gonna go from there. Okay, doke. So I've just got a cheap little block here, sacrificial piece of wood, and I've got my little piece of leather, 500 grit strips. This blows through sandpaper really fast. I'll show you why. It loads up the sandpaper super fast. But basically we're gonna pull off pretty much all of that finish that we've already put on. Everything that's high of the pores, we're planning on taking off right now. Actually, that didn't load up this sandpaper nearly as bad as I thought it was going to right off the bat. But the trick is definitely to use the block and not your fingers, because this method right here
requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of finesse to get it right. See how I'm kind of just rolling over the radius right there. You can see it coming off. And there we go. That's what I'm talking about with the sandpaper. See how it loads up the sandpaper really fast? So if you keep sanding with it loaded up like this, this gets gummy and it'll start dragging across your finish. And you certainly don't want that either. So we're just gonna keep moving to a different part of the sandpaper. You're just knocking off the top layers. You don't want to take it out of the pores. Alright, so that's the top. Done and done. Turn this. Can you see it? Let's get you in there. Alright, there you go. You can see it now. Let me flip it to manual focus so it won't go out of focus as I'm working here. Alright, now watch this as I start to sand this off. You can watch it happen. Okay, just want to make sure. So you can see really fast I have a low spot right there. Alright, looking awesome. Any shiny spots indicate a low spot where the sandpaper's not reaching it. You can see shiny spots. When you have really deep pores, when you finish, you'll see speckled shiny spots all over the wood. If you see a shiny spot, then that's telling you that you did not do enough buildup, because that shiny spot you have not got sanded, so it's still low of the rest of the surface, and that's what we're trying to get away. That's what we want to get away from. We don't want any shiny spots left, because then when you do your finish, you'll see a dimple in your finish because it won't be flush with the rest of the surface. We're getting there. And there we go. That's the front. And it loads up that paper fast. Okay. Perfect. It's looking great. Look at that. You'll see the difference when I come back to put on my finish coats. This will lay out glass smooth. And that may not be your thing, you know. You may not even care. And if I sell this knife to somebody who doesn't care, you know what? I know in my heart, I did my best to make this thing the best that it could be before it left my shop. So nobody's gonna come back to me and say, hey, you know, you sold me a knife that you could have done way better on. My conscience knows that I did my best. And that's the biggest thing. Remember, don't over sand it. You're just knocking that top finish off. Okay, that's it for this side. Okay, let's get it flipped over. Alright, so here we go. Definitely remove the swarf as often as you can so it doesn't gum up and tarnish your finish. You really don't want that, because all that is just tongue oil, dry tongue oil. Oh, this is going to be awesome. You know, I've decided right now, just now, while I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and do handle finish videos on the other methods that I described just now earlier in this video. Just to kind of show you the different methods on the different handle materials. You know, that trick with the mother's mag polish, that's a good one. Wait till you guys try that. I think you'll be shocked. You know, that's just not one that I've seen out there anywhere else, and it works really well. Got a really nice symmetrical shape on this handle this time. Just so you know, the reason that I do give myself lines and different reference points is because early in my knife career, I made several knives that I was not happy with. And you know, it took me a while to learn how to lay out guidelines and reference points because my eyes need that. You know, some people might be able to just walk up to a grinder and turn out a perfect knife from one side to the other. Well, I got news for you. I'm not that guy. You know, I like to put out a quality product, and I've found that for me to do that, I have to give myself reference points and different things to work towards to achieve the goals that I have in my mind. When you go to block these off, it really shows you fast how well you did on keeping things flat. And I did really well on this knife. All right. Okay. This side here to do. This is probably the hardest side to do. There's multiple facets in here that are hard to get into. So when I sand, I'm really using this leading edge here more than anything.
Last order of business, the butt of the knife. Okay, we've gone ahead and we've sanded this out. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean it off, make sure that we get all the debris off of here because we're going in with our finish coats now. So when we go in, we want the finish coats to lay down on a perfect surface. That way we don't see any imperfections in our finish coats that we're gonna lay down. I wanted to point out, see these light color lines that are coming out from the center? These striation lines? These are actual checks in the wood. These are cracks that opened up during the drying process. And that's what made this wood so unique, is that there's all these lateral checks that came out from the center. And then when I stabilized it with cactus juice resin in a vacuum chamber, I forced the resin into all these pores and checks and then turned that resin into a type of plastic. It turns to a plastic resin inside of those checks. Now, the finish process that I'm showing you, if there's any voids or little spots or little pinholes that weren't filled by the resin, that's what this finish process goes ahead and fixes up. So here we are, this is before we apply our finish coat. And now I'm gonna go ahead and apply the first coat of tung oil. I've taken my rag and I've knocked all the extra lint off of it. Probably it would be best to use an old t-shirt, a lint-free rag that you've put through the wash a whole bunch of times. But I don't have that right now, so I'm just gonna use this rag right here that I've knocked the lint off of. There's my tung oil. And we're gonna just try to do a nice wipe. Now this will lay on the top. Now this finish, we want to go on real thin, so you know, we're not going to let it set up. We're actually going to do a whole bunch of thin coats, so you don't want it to be thick. So when I'm done, it's going to have this matte finish right now. It's going to take several coats to build up before we get the gloss finish that we're looking for. But we don't want to just go on super thick right in the beginning because that will add imperfections to the finish. And that's certainly not what we're after here. We want as smooth and perfect of a finish that we can get. So these finish coats are real thin coats. They're not buildup coats. So you want to do nice long strokes. And then in between each coat, what we're going to do is we're going to buff this with 4/0 steel wool so we can actually knock down any high spots, or if, you know, little pieces of anything land on it while it's drying, it will knock those off so that we don't get any surface imperfections. We don't want any of that. As soon as you start feeling this oil go gummy is when you stop. And then you wipe off the excess and let it dry. Since we're going really thin on these finish coats, I normally only give it about 2 hours between each coat, and that's pretty sufficient.
4/0 steel wool. This works really nice for knocking down the high spots of the oil without removing too much of the finish. We're just trying to smooth things out. So as you knock the shine off, you think, oh no, I've ruined all my hard work. But you haven't. The second you put this next coat on, it comes right back. This actually creates a mechanical bond for the next layer that you put on. But you are definitely going to want to get all of the little pieces of steel wool off before you start adding more coats. So sometimes when you're adding your oil finish, even when you're using cut up t-shirts, you can introduce little pieces of lint and stuff like that. And that's what this is doing. It's knocking all of that stuff off. It's especially important around the perimeter of the knife where your fingers are, because you may not be able to see it, but your fingers will feel it right away. Okay, so that's pretty good. See, just a little bit. All right, we've gone ahead and got this all cleaned up. All the little imperfections have been knocked down. And so one thing I want to tell you is when you use paper towels, you're going to put little tiny pieces of lint in there. And the buildup coats, I don't really care because I'm going to knock 90% of that off. So when we get it to this point and we're going to do our finish coats, take a cut up t-shirt that has been washed a whole bunch of times, and then you put your paper towel on the inside of the t-shirt like this, okay? And then that way you won't have any lint. So you just make a dabber, get your oil on there like that, and then I'm going to bring you in and show you. And this will go on perfectly smooth with no little pieces of lint or anything like that. These last couple coats we're going to do with this just to make sure it's perfect. You can do the entire process like this with a t-shirt if you wanted to. It uses up a lot of t-shirts to do this process. You guys have seen me. I've done what? This 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This is probably 13 coats total to do the whole finishing process. So, you know, add that up. That's a lot of t-shirts. Here we go. Perfect. Almost done. We are finished with the tongue oil. Now I'm going to move on to the paste wax. I just put a little paste wax on a rag. At this point you're going to want that lint-free rag again. A little bit, not quite that much. And you just goop this on. I like to put it on real thick like that. Alright, now watch what happens. You can see those clumps right there. Now I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to work this back and forth until those clumps dissolve and run. So now I've got it to the point where it'll run. There we go. Perfect. You don't want to leave it clumped up, because when this stuff dries, It's super hard to get off. There we go. We'll go ahead and do the other side. Okay, we'll let that cool off, and then I'll buff it by hand with a rag, and this handle's done. I'll show you guys up close. Okay, let's come in here. Just a nice soft rag. Give this a buff. Hear that sound it makes? You can tell how hard that wax got. Alright, let's get some close-ups of this. That wraps up the handle finish. Came out really nice. You know, a couple days from now, I could even put another coat of wax on this just to thicken that wax coat up. You know, if you like the shiny handle, you can make it even shinier with a little more wax. If you don't like the shiny handle, you could just do a couple coats less. You could still do the build-up just like I did, just a couple less coats, and then wax it, and it comes out awesome. This is a really grippy handle, by the way. This is not a slippery handle. It's that's the thing about this kind of build-up finish with the wax on top. It grips your hand. I mean, it's sticky. You can hear it. It's sticky. It's a good handle for handling, or this is a great handle finish option, even for knife handles with you know, field knives where you're going to be in a deer or anything like that where you think the blood might be slippery or something like that. This holds up great. I've never had a knife slip around in my hand. This is a great knife for that. The knife that we built for this series, this is a really ideal size for camping, hunting, all around campsite work. You know, you can skin deer with this. You could even do squirrels and small game. It's a little big for a rabbit or a bird, but you could easily do it. That's the whole thing. You know, the other thing is you can prepare your camp dinner. You can chop potatoes and vegetables. You can cut your steak after you cook it. You can use this knife for everything. I've made lots of knives this size. I take them camping with me. I've put them to the test. This is a good size knife. You know, you might go just a little bit smaller if you really want to use it for everything, but this was a great build. I had a lot of fun. We're going to move right into the next video where I'm going to start making a sheath for this bad boy, because what good is having a knife if you don't have a sheath to carry it in?